Hi, I'm Bob Burdenski. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this opening plenary session for the 2014 Case Europe Regular Giving Conference. Okay, that script's not going to work so well, but thanks for taking the time to check out this presentation. This is the plenary session that you would have seen had I been there, and once again, my apologies for not being able to make the trip. It certainly wasn't my choice. This session was intended to be sort of a breezy overview and introduction to where we think regular giving is at today, and the goal was to share some examples from some pretty far-flung places, which I've gotten to a few since the last time I was at the regular giving conference. Here are my friends at the Indian School of Business down in Hyderabad, India. The ISB is a fairly new institution, but views itself on a par with the Wharton Business School and NCOD and the London Business School, but hasn't done any alumni fundraising, but feels, rightfully so, that its graduates are just as proud as graduates of those other institutions, and so is jumping in with 2 feet in thinking about launching a regular giving program. Down in Shanghai, here's me with the black-haired staff of Fudan University. I was there a year and a half ago to celebrate the occasion of the university translating my first case book, Innovations in Annual Giving, into Chinese, the first case book ever to be translated into Chinese. And I'm certainly very proud of that, and proud also that the first case book translated into Chinese was an annual giving book, by gosh. Even the Chinese, who have no history of education philanthropy whatsoever, still understand that from little acorns grow mighty oaks, right? And so they're getting the ball rolling in talking about the idea of supporting educational institutions there. I think that's my name, by the way, on the front cover, but I'm not sure. Who knows what it says. But anyway, a big thrill for me, and I think a good sign for our profession as well. Some of the examples featured in this presentation can be found in my new casebook, Online Innovations in Annual and Regular Giving. As I record this, the book is scheduled to be published in January of 2015. This is not a sales pitch, but if you like some of the ideas that you see in this session, I'm sure Case would enjoy me inviting you to consider acquiring this book for your library. Note, by the way, the first Innovations in Annual Giving book I wrote for Case featured 10 departures that worked. That was 15 years ago, and that's not enough these days. So it's expanded to 10 dozen departures that worked. It was a lot of work putting it together. It's got a digital version of it, so you can look at links online as you're reading about them, and I'm proud of it. So think about that if you'd like to bring some examples into the office. 2 disclaimers in this session also before I get rolling here. First of all, there's a number of vendors, service providers, web apps that I'm going to mention in this session. I am not in cahoots with anybody. Bob Burdenski gets no compensation for bringing up any vendor or service, but these are resources that people have recommended to me from institutions like you, and so I'm passing them on just as an FYI, but just know that there's nothing under the table for bringing up some of these folks. And second of all, when this was originally an opening plenary session, that meant that I got to go first and could say things before all the other great speakers that were at the regular giving conference. Now I'm coming along last, and I honestly don't know what anybody else said at the conference, but I do know we had some great speakers and some great topics. And so this is a tip of my hat, and also an apology, probably, if I say anything that got said first and probably better by other speakers that were at the conference. That's not to steal anybody's thunder. That's just to acknowledge that sometimes great minds think alike, right? And so excuse me if I bring up something that got said already somewhere else. Here's the structure for this talk. I put together 20 trending tips that I think are impacting our profession, and I'm just going to throw them out and show you some examples to support the points I want to make. Number one here about June 30th, it's actually something that you all in Europe figured out before my American friends, which I think is partly why annual giving has become regular giving in Europe and increasingly elsewhere. The appreciation that this isn't an annual cycle anymore, that there's nothing particular about June 30th as a deadline as opposed to a day of giving deadline or a month of giving deadline or the end of the tax year deadline. And in fact, what I see as the annual giving calendar is increasingly becoming a bunch of little calendars. And it used to take a year for us to solicit everybody, and a lot of our appeals were very process-driven things, and that's not the case anymore. And I think we're rewarded in fundraising when we can have a little bit of urgency, even if it's what I would call positive urgency with a challenge grant or something like that. But otherwise, the ability to invoke a call to action that wasn't so urgent when we would always tell people you have until June 30th or December 31st to pay your annual giving pledge. There's just been an acceleration of that whole timeline, and it's important to pay attention to that. There's one parallel I want to point out, and that is the people in the billboard industry. At least in the U.S. we call these billboards, and this used to be a very paperboard-driven process, that you would buy a billboard and it would be up for a month or a couple of months or a year over the highway. And now the digital billboard has arrived, and now you can talk in real time if you're the billboard salesman about how you can put today's temperature on a billboard and tell people they need to take their kids to the water park because 82 degrees won't last very long. That's 82 degrees Fahrenheit, by the way. Or that Target has a sale that goes until Saturday, so you need to get down to Target today to take advantage of the discounts that are available. All very real time. Here's one pointing out that the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball season begins in 4.5 hours. So you need to go get your tickets for today's game. Better yet, become a season ticket holder. But all very real-time driven. You know, the billboard industry has seen its own type of acceleration, where it's not just what's the message you want to present for the next month or the next year, but what's the message you want to present today. And I think that is similar to what we're facing in regular giving fundraising. That how do I stitch together over the course of a year a number of messages that invoke a sense of urgency and inspire a call to action, and that aren't as bogged down by process and printing and production in the way that a lot of our annual giving best practice used to be. And so our messaging has evolved from give before our year ends in several months to a month of giving challenge to a 36-hour giving challenge to now a day giving challenge. Here's the crazy people at Colgate University, where they have this obsession with the number 13. 13 trustees founded the place. The address is 13 some street. And that means that Friday the 13th, as unlikely as that would seem for any other institution, becomes a regular fundraising day at Colgate. And whenever in the course of a year Friday the 13th pops up, you know, as a Colgate graduate, you're going to get a message saying it's the day to support Colgate, celebrate your love of being part of the Colgate family. Only Colgate would do this, but that's the kind of relevance and the kind of positive urgency and the kind of do something today call to action that you're seeing more and more in our annual giving programs. There's other ways this is showing up too. This is commencement day at Pepperdine University's law school. And so they're telling you that yesterday we graduated 400 new law students. They're all committing to give to the annual fund. And why don't you join them right now with your gift to the Pepperdine Law School? Again, very real time. No messaging about months from now. It's do something right now while we're still celebrating the most recent commencement at Pepperdine. I see a whole evolving annual giving calendar that really is date-specific times and moments. And not to rattle off every one of these things, but things like the short-term giving challenges that you're seeing these days, and I'll talk more about that in a bit when we get into social media. The It's Give to Us Day, like the Colgate folks. The end of the calendar year and the end of the fiscal year, which have always been sort of talking points for us, just in a slower production kind of a way, are still relevant. As a postscript to people who come to events, again, I see more and more integration between what the fundraising work of my alumni relations officers are doing and what we're doing from a fundraising point of view. If people raise their hand and come down the hill to get involved at one of your events, how much time needs to go by before we invite them to also express their support by making a gift. The anniversary date of last gift messages that go out, I'll show you some of those examples in a bit, time specific and relevant to the individual. Other important campus days, your commencement, your Founders Day. I saw a school last year that on the first snowfall in the fall, that became an excuse to take a picture of kids sliding down a hill on cafeteria trays and make that an appeal for remember when you were back on campus, make a gift. Spontaneous good news. March Madness refers to the college basketball tournament in the States where 64 teams get invited to play each year in March. It's a prestigious thing and it's a bragging point for a lot of schools, and that has become a bit of a real-time message now in an annual giving context. Last on that list is the reference to in concert with other appeals. Multi-channel marketing is a big buzzword these days, and it's hard to measure, how you raise all boats by talking about giving in different messaging. But it does make sense to me, again, to go back to my billboard analogy. You don't just put up one billboard, you put them up all over town so that people see them several times, and you integrate it with TV advertising or newspaper advertising. So that makes sense to me that it's smart to give people multiple impressions of your message, but I just don't have a lot of data on specifically what that return on investment is. Anyway, I think this is a departure from the very production-driven timeline in annual giving to now really thinking about what are those dates, what are those moments that really resonate with people and motivate them to do something. And, none of these is your only challenge, your only opportunity to make a gift to the annual fund or the regular giving program, but stitched together make an annual giving year in the life of in their own right. My trending tip number 2 is probably more accurately a non-trending tip. This reference to participation rate metrics not going away, neither is their cost. And I know that that's a very American obsessive thing that we have thanks to report rankings and things like that Americans really do fixate on participation as a metric more than maybe they should. Although you know better than me that other institutions outside the U.S., the Vice Chancellor always reserves the right to declare that that's an important metric to him or her as well. And you all have campaigns where participation growth becomes one of the metrics. And so even though we're quite compulsive in the States, I know that it shows up in other forms, in other places of the world. I want to make you aware of this man, who most people in the U.S. don't know, but is important for this conversation. This is Robert Morse. He's the man at U.S. News and World Report magazine in the States, the company that produces the most prominent rankings of U.S. colleges and universities. And I met with him about a year ago at his office, and one of the things we discussed was this focus on alumni giving participation rates, which is one of the metrics that he includes in his equation for how they rank colleges and universities. And he sat there quite proud to tell me that he sees no foreseeable change in his magazine's importance that it assigns to alumni giving participation rates. So that's just a fair warning to my friends across the pond that means U.S. News is going to be continuing to look at alumni giving participation as one of the metrics in its rankings. That means that university presidents and board members and vice presidents for advancement are going to continue to focus on alumni giving participation as a metric, which means my college and university counterparts in fundraising and annual giving are going to keep having to answer to what are we doing to grow alumni giving participation. And my guess is that that's going to trickle over to you all in some form or another as your institutions seek to be validated by alumni support of our mission and the fact that we're showing support among our constituents in the same way Americans and Canadians and others are doing the same thing. It's important to say that that's not an inexpensive proposition to acquire new donors. And especially these days, as the old 80-20 rule of fundraising has become the 95-5 rule of fundraising, that 5% of your donors will produce 95% of your revenue. There's a lot of good reasons to talk yourself out of participation as a metric. But as long as there are decision makers who value that statement from our constituent audiences, then I think we need to be willing to roll up our sleeves and think about how we maximize participation. It can be an expensive proposition. Acquiring a new donor can be, at best, a break-even proposition. But this is a trend that's a non-trend on my list that from where I'm sitting in the States, I don't see the participation metric going away anytime soon, thanks in large part to this man. Trending tip number 3 of mine is that video is becoming the new letter. And, I'm of a certain age where I can appreciate a very eloquently written letter. And I certainly spent a lot of years recruiting class agents whose job it was to handcraft a letter to their classmates, because that motivated people to give in a very personal way. And it's still hard for me to believe that younger generations are more graphic friendly and are more now increasingly video friendly. I have talked in presentations for a long time about this woman, one of the very first appeal videos I ever saw. This is from the Naples Christian Academy down in Florida, where she was asking her fellow parents at her child's school to join her with their gift to the annual fund, and even declared that the goal is 100% participation, which sends a chill down the spine of every annual giving director I know. But from a marketing point of view, it's not a bad message, and they just kind of went with it. And that voice, in contrast to a letter, was a really new departure not that long ago. And I now think we're also arriving at an intersection where the selfie video is going to become more prominent in the makeup of how we send out appeals to folks. This guy is a graduate of Assumption College and shot this video with his iPhone, standing on campus one day, asking you to join him in making your gift to the Assumption College annual fund. If you Google Assumption College, you can find this video. I also have a whole repository of videos in YouTube. If you Google the Annual Fund Film Festival, you'll see my collection of more than 100 videos, which includes this one from Assumption College and the previous one from my friend Robin at the Naples Christian Academy. I think video is being liberated a bit, from being a separate office with a separate budget, with annual giving being the least important priority in terms of producing content. I think we're increasingly evolving to places like this man, who is just doing something very organically, not very professionally, somewhat imperfectly, but I think it's going to connect with audiences in the right situation at the right type of institution. And so if you've talked yourself out of video because we have no budget, we don't have the time of the video person, we don't know how to do it ourselves, I would just make room in your thinking that people are starting to not get caught up in the production quality, but are appreciating the value of that voice and that guy's personal appeal. So think about that in the mix of things going forward. Take a long look at LinkedIn. LinkedIn wants to be your best friend in education because LinkedIn wants your graduates to use LinkedIn as a primary resource for their career search and to network with each other. So that means LinkedIn right now is making some resources, some data, some windows available to educational institutions in a way that not everybody gets to enjoy. And so the value that LinkedIn provides in terms of showing you who your graduates are that are proud of their association with you, that they list you in their educational profile, along with the ability to see who's done pretty well for themselves, is a pretty good intersection of affinity and affluence or wealth. So, I don't need to have a whole big prospect research office to appreciate what sort of efficiency that can bring to our efforts. In annual giving in particular, there's a couple of things. First of all, there are matching gift programs. I know they're bigger in the States, but I'm seeing them increasingly in other parts of the world where IBM or General Electric or whomever will match gifts of their graduates anywhere in the world. I can now be the London School of Business and can search on my graduates that have attended LBS and now work for IBM or any other corporation and get a list of exactly who those people are and make them an audience that I can speak to very specifically about the GE matching gift program. So that kind of thing is a really interesting resource. It's not worth our budget anymore to send big matching gift mailings to everybody in the database because so many programs have been discontinued. And I don't know who worked for what companies. But now LinkedIn all of a sudden turns on that light and makes it possible to be efficient at speaking to those audiences. I think you're going to see before too long a phone-a-thon that goes into the last month of its calling calendar, trying to figure out which prospects to call as a priority and segments out people in LinkedIn because they've got a good professional career going for themselves. That's all stuff that can be done right. Here's an example in the college and university portal on LinkedIn. I think I did this this is my alma mater, Miami University in Ohio. And I can go in and say, show me all the LinkedIn graduates that are in the UK, and they'll show me what occupations they're in, what companies they work for, and they'll even show me exactly who they are. And this is screen after screen. This is more than 200 people that went to my university that are now living in the UK. And I showed you this screen just because these people don't have their full names in, but I could do page after page of seeing exactly who this crowd is. And that lets me be very efficient. If I'm out of the office looking to engage with leadership annual giving prospects in London or Los Angeles or New York or wherever, I can now use a resource like LinkedIn to see exactly where they are, who they are, what their job titles are, and all sorts of other useful information to prospect identification. So give some thought to that. I'm not sure how long LinkedIn makes all these resources available to us for free, but I know at the moment they're all happy to bring us into their tent and get us used to what kind of a resource LinkedIn is. So think about it from that pyramid building point of view. There may be some limited value to LinkedIn from a broad appeal context, but when you're talking about some precise corporate alumni audiences and some precise leadership annual giving prospects, that's not a bad tool to keep in mind, LinkedIn. Related to LinkedIn, but a little bit different, is Facebook. And I know that some of you like telling me that, well, I already hear that our current students don't use Facebook anymore and Facebook's becoming passé, which means that you did nothing when Facebook became prominent, and now you're doing nothing as you watch Facebook right into the sunset. I think for the same type of reason why LinkedIn is worth paying attention to, you ought to just give some thought to Facebook. And we'll talk about Facebook from a volunteer engagement point of view in a few minutes as well. But the same basic principle that Facebook allows you to drill down and focus on just your audience, because when you set up a Facebook advertisement, you can specify that I only want it to appear in front of people who are going to my institution or who went to my institution. And so that precision with speaking to your audience, I just think is something to really pay attention to. If you don't know, here's how you go in and set up an advertisement in Facebook. And again, I can say I'm the Ohio State University, and I want to know all of the Ohio State graduates that are in all of these overseas countries. And Facebook will tell me exactly how many people that we're talking about. There's 2,600 Ohio State graduates in Europe and Australia as we sit here. And so I can set up a Facebook advertisement that will appear only to those people. And again, I think when you combine date-specific things like a day of giving with the precision of knowing that an advertisement in Facebook is only going to appear in front of your audience, that's a very cost-efficient way to think about how you get that giving message out. Here's some examples from one particular school in the U.S. This is the Mississippi University for Women. So they had their day of giving on December 12th of 2012, the perfect 12-12-12 giving day. So this was an ad that ran on Facebook for just a couple of days around that date and only appeared in front of MUW graduates. They did a variation of that on Valentine's Day. This became kind of the teaser advertisement on that day. And there was another ad they ran trying to round up kids who graduated who had served as telephone callers while they were students at MUW. So, they don't have the records, obviously, on who was a caller and who wasn't while they were students. So this is a little bit of a long way around the hill to find that. But I still like the precision. I like the quality of the artwork and the fact that this was cost-effective for them because they were able to pinpoint their alumni audience at MUW. Like with everything else, I think we can overdo things like Facebook from a fundraising point of view. I don't want people to tune us out because this became all about fundraising. I know a lot of you have campus Facebook pages where the person controlling that page isn't always thrilled to see you because we don't want to turn the Facebook page into a solicitation vehicle. I mean, I would point out, though, that Facebook is a great way to be another stewardship resource, so to thank people publicly for gifts. Villanova University in Pennsylvania every Tuesday has Thank a Donor Tuesday and profiles one of its donors on a Facebook page that day. It's where a lot of my constituents are frolicking these days on Facebook and other social media. And so, it doesn't do me any good if everybody tunes us out because this becomes all about fundraising. On the other hand, there are other ways to use Facebook to reinforce the idea of giving. And with Facebook ads like these, I just think it's something to pay attention to for the reason of how precise I can be talking to my audience. For a lot of other possible message delivery resources, it's hard to be that precise with the audience that I'm talking about. My sixth tip is this one. Your student philanthropy program needs to look like a marketing plan before it looks like anything else. And you know that I know that you know that I know that you can join plenty of webinars talking about how we did our student philanthropy day or how we did our senior gift program or how we did our tuition freedom day. And there's lots of fun, good, exciting examples out there. But before you do any of them, before you copy anybody, my opinion and my observation is that you ought to be sure you've got straight what are the lessons that we're trying to teach our students and how are we delivering those lessons? Because a lot of time and energy can go into conducting a senior gift program or any other student development initiative. And it's sometimes a little murky, what the long-term results are of those efforts. The University of Pennsylvania that I absolutely love, and they do a whole range of stuff. Proud Penn Traditions is kind of their brand for student philanthropy initiatives as well as recent graduate initiatives. They have done a lot of speaking and deserve a lot of credit for the great things that they've done there. But the reason I love them is because of this set of bullet points, which was the marketing strategies that they thought through at the beginning of the conversation about what should the Proud Penn Traditions program look like. So This list of 6 things doesn't have to be your list of what you're trying to teach students, but it is Penn's list. And I think the important point is to get this list right before you go off copying anything that Penn does or anything that anybody else does in terms of what you do with the student philanthropy program. So here was Penn's list. We want students to be aware of our institutional mission. We want them to feel like they're part of a campus family from before they arrive, and so they feel that sense of pride and community. We want them to understand that their tuition doesn't fully fund their education, that they're benefiting from the generosity of people that came before, that there's a gap there that Penn needs to fill every year. The sense of traditions, again, they're standing on the shoulders of alumni that came before them, and those folks are given back to Penn, and they're going to be expected to do the same thing someday. That they're a lifelong member of the Penn alumni community. This isn't a transaction that ends on the day that you graduate. This is the beginning of a beautiful Penn community relationship. You need to grab the kids and teach them about that culture and not just hope that they're going to pick it up while they're a student on campus. And last, and maybe most important to me, is build volunteer networks that will endure as alumni. To me, that might be the biggest goal for any kind of a senior gift program, is to get the students organized through that exercise and to help support that cause, and to see who the good student volunteers are and identify them so that we can come back to them later on after they become graduates. This was the set of objectives that Penn framed for itself. And once they got those right, it then became a smarter process to say, okay, we should do a senior gift program to engage volunteers. We should do a tuition freedom day so that kids understand that their education, is only partly funded. Otherwise to drive the tactics by what the goals are. It's true for everything else we do in annual giving and regular giving, and it's true for the student philanthropy part of it as well. There's another good example of this down in Singapore, where my old friend Marina Tan Harper helped to create a student philanthropy program that had never existed before. In fact, that's understating it, because Singapore had not previously had much of a tradition of supporting higher education. So Marina shows up. She was born in Singapore. She came to live in the States, got into advancement while there, and then went back to Singapore to really sort of teach them the culture that she learned in the U.S. So this is the track record from the 6 years of her building the student philanthropy program at Nanyang Technological University. Back in 2006, barely 20% of students supported NTU. By the time she left in 2012, they were up to 82% participation. It's not understating it to say that her experience there has impacted alumni giving and, in fact, impacted giving to all of higher education in the country of Singapore. This is an article from the Straits Times, the Singapore newspaper, from just a couple years ago, talking about how successful Marina had been in growing the class giving program at NTU, and how that had become a motivation for graduates to give back in the same way that current students were giving back to NTU. And that also became a little bit of a bragging right among other universities in Singapore. The National University in Singapore started to get a little jealous of why they were having such success at NTU, and why can't we enjoy the same success here at NUS. So one woman who really went over to Singapore with the vision of what student philanthropy could look like and what they were trying to accomplish from a participation point of view has really changed course for philanthropy at universities in Singapore, by making this a source of pride and a point of pride for institutions to talk about. Again, there's that participation metric. But again, what she did right, to come back to my tip, is that she understood what the marketing goals were. And from those objectives came the strategies that made up her NTU class gift campaign. My seventh trending tip is to be aggressive with your stewardship. When I was a boy in annual giving, stewardship was an afterthought. Annual giving stewardship was an oxymoron. All of my printing and postage budget went to soliciting people. I didn't have much money left to be thanking anybody. So if you got a prompt thank you, from the annual giving office, congratulations. Hope you enjoyed it, because that's probably all you're going to get. We increasingly now live in a time where it's much more possible to cost effectively conduct stewardship and to give people hugs in an ongoing way in appreciation for their gift. And I'll go a step further and say that we are starting to look conspicuous in education if you don't have a good stewardship plan. There are other charities that will run circles around you showing people the love for their gift, because they've figured out that this doesn't have to cost a whole lot of money. And in fact, it's in our best interest to show people the love in an ongoing way as a retention strategy and to help motivate their next gift. So even though I think we were able to get away with not a whole lot of stewardship and annual giving, I think the jig is up. And I think you need to think about what a year in the life of stewardship for your donors looks like. Here's a couple of examples of that. This is McMaster University in Canada. And they packaged together a couple years ago, and have been doing it ever since, an online report of giving. In fact, it's a video annual report of giving that essentially took a lot of video that already existed at Mac and repurposed it from a stewardship point of view. And they stitched it all together with this email with the banner about the power of your gift. And you scroll through this message and you can see a video from one of the research faculty and news about the great discoveries they had made this year, recipients of your funding. Here's a video message from the president at McMaster, who's not the most eloquent or video-friendly person you'll ever see, but by God, it's from the heart, and by God, it feels like you're sitting right in his office having him thank you in person. And this is also in the annual fund film festival if you want to see his video firsthand. A lot of stuff that didn't have to cost a lot of money to put together, certainly didn't cost a lot of money to distribute to anybody, but I think conveys a lot of the same things that we were conveying with a printed annual report, but just done in a much more easy to distribute, cost-effective kind of a way. So this kind of thing, which would have been cost prohibitive in a paper-driven world, now all of a sudden isn't that difficult to imagine and isn't that hard to produce. Here's another quick little example. This is a poem written and read by this student, Emma Black, that got sent out as an email from Brigham Young University. You click on that link there and you hear her thank you message, ode to a donor. Didn't cost a lot. It's a little sappy, but I'm sure it warms the hearts of those folks living in Utah and just makes them feel good that they're hearing from a real live student thanking them for their gift to BYU. Just nice touches like this that I think create their own column in the annual giving calendar for just trying to be conscientious about keeping the donors that we already have. And what are the little touches like this that you can stitch together over the course of a year that help with that donor retention rate and help keep those donors that we spent so much to acquire in the first place? And that's not to say that printed stewardship pieces can't be smart and can't still serve an important purpose. Here's one that I really like from Washington University in St. Louis. This is a printed sort of twofold small brochure that goes out at the end of the fiscal year to say thank you one more time to donors. And you flip through this and here's an itemized set of good news that happened at WashU this year that you ought to feel good about as a donor. Here's a picture live from commencement that just happened a few weeks prior to the end of the year. And wanted you to see what you were helping to produce through your gift. There's a couple specific reasons why this is a nice idea. One of which is that this goes out right at the end of the fiscal year. to let people know the old annual fund year is ending and the new annual fund year is starting. And you know that I know that you know that I know that a lot of our prospects and donors don't think in terms of the annual giving calendar like we do. So to punctuate that, I think is smart to let people know it's the end of the year and you may get a solicitation soon, but it's for the new annual giving year, not the one that just ended. Punctuating our timeline, I think, is a good idea in a very deliberate way. And that's why they choose to send this out as a paper mailing, by the way. It would be easy to send as an email, but they invest the money and the time just because they really want to make that statement. It's the end of the annual giving year. There is no solicitation with this mailing, but shortly after this mailing goes out, within a couple of weeks, the first appeal for the new annual giving calendar comes along. And I think that is smart to remind people about how well you thanked them right before you ask them for a gift again. You know, in a way, we're a victim of our own efficiency when we send a thank you letter right after somebody makes their gift, which at a lot of institutions can mean months will go by before, they ever think about that gift to your institution. So I like how Washington University reminds people about how much we appreciated your gift and how well we thanked you for your gift right before they're going to ask you for the next gift for the new annual giving year. I just think is smart synchronization. So I think your stewardship calendar ought to have a stewardship piece right before you ask again for the new annual giving year. Smart idea. This page with the bullet points. I get told a lot of the time that our donors want a very deliberate, precise report of what their gift went to. And I know that it seems logical to say that, and maybe it's even true, but I also believe that if we did a good job of thanking people for their gift, they wouldn't be so hung up on wanting to know exactly where my gift went. Because a lot of your donors are just wanting to support you, the institution. So I like how Washington University gives this list of things your generosity supports in the past year. A lot of feel-good stuff that isn't really an accounting of exactly what my gift went to, but is a nice way of saying, look at the kinds of things that you make possible by your support of Washington University. And I think for most donors, just the demonstration of that effort to give you an accounting, I think means that most people aren't going to be that hung up about knowing exactly what my $100 went to. They're here to support you, I think, primarily. And I worry that we get ourselves all stressed out over the accounting of gifts all the time when, language like this, I think, would help with a good number of our donors. And I think that's what WashU understands well here. So you tie up all those thoughts, and I just think this year-end stewardship strategy is a good one at WashU. And, again, is part of the tip that don't take stewardship for granted. And in fact, use stewardship in a strategic way, in a way that's just going to promote donor retention and is going to keep your existing donors in the fold. Trend number 8 is build your virtual volunteer toolkit. It's not hard to declare that you're having a day of giving these days, 48 hours of giving, a week of giving. To push out that information is easy, and to make that announcement is not hard. To make it succeed, it really involves empowering an army of your online ambassadors or your virtual volunteers. That is the secret sauce that makes these things succeed. And it is really the ingredient that we've used for a long time in regular giving, because that voice of that peer is so powerful. We saw that with the selfie videos, and it's true in general with social media in terms of leveraging those voices and that advocacy and those relationships that those people have with their peers. So here's a couple places that have done it really well. Georgetown University did what they call the City Challenge over the last couple of years. One day a year where all of the most prominent Georgetown alumni city chapters would hold events, and on that one day would all be on deck promoting the idea of Support Georgetown Today. And whether or not people came to the events themselves, there was a whole lot of awareness building online with social media that today's the Georgetown City Challenge. Let's help Chicago win the Georgetown City Challenge. And Georgetown, as you can see here, packaged a whole lot of social media tools and tips and artwork for people to pass along to their friends, to put artwork on their Facebook page, to use the right Twitter hashtags and things like that. So very proactive in terms of giving people the tools that they need to most fully be an advocate on Georgetown's behalf. McMaster University up in Canada did a very similar thing when they had their 125th Bursary Challenge just a year or two ago. Same sort of mobilization, same sort of tools for all of their supporters. So it's not just enough to say we're having a Day of Giving challenge. It's not even just enough to recruit a bunch of people who mean well but need some hand-holding to make sure that they do the job properly. So look at some of these examples as ways to really organize people and equip them to be the best advocates that they can be. Related to that, but slightly different, is the experience that the University of New South Wales has had down in Australia. UNSW became aware one day that a number of its graduates were running marathons or participating in triathlons or other cause-related events and were naming the university as the beneficiary. So here's a page that talks about all the different things you can support at UNSW, but it's on the home page of something called Everyday Hero, which is the cause advocacy platform that's used over in Australia, so that I can create my own page, say I'm running my own triathlon, and name a fund at the University of New South Wales as my beneficiary. That's all great, but that was all being done without any awareness of the University of New South Wales. Here's what one typical page looks like, and I know there are comparable sites in the UK and in Europe and elsewhere. You can design your own page, you put in the fund that you're dedicating your triathlon to, you can put your goal in there. It's all very user-friendly. The problem was it was just being done without the university's awareness. So UNSW now is devoting some staff time to paying attention to these nice people, offering to be of any assistance, in some cases guiding them towards funds, where somebody might be trying to raise funds for things that aren't necessarily a university priority, and otherwise are just trying to facilitate the work of these people. Now, it's another step from there that you also see going on these days, where institutions are equipping themselves to offer this kind of functionality to interested volunteers directly. So there's less of a need for a third party like Everyday Hero in Australia. That's a little bit more of an investment in resourcing to provide that platform. But again, it's the awareness and the appreciation that there's people out there that want to do something on our behalf and will tap into their own network of friends and relationships to do it. And so what role do we have as institutions to facilitate that? I had a conversation with a vice president at a prestigious independent school in the U.S. just a couple of months ago. And it was his belief that this is one of the social media uses that's really going to stay around a good while. The idea of people naming us as a cause and allowing us to tap into their network of social relationships as a way of broadening our donor base and engaging volunteers in a way that makes them feel good. So keep that in mind. Keep those volunteers trained and equipped with all the tools they need to succeed. One more Day of Giving and volunteer training resource to share with you, maybe the best one, is this website, givingdayplaybook.org. Giving Days, as near as I can tell, it really originated up in Minnesota in the States, where a foundation there made it a goal to promote one single day of giving that could help all charities within the state. And now that's been customized in education to really have our own personal day of giving at our institution. This is a great website with all kinds of nice resources. If you decide you want to do a day of giving, you don't need to feel like you're inventing this from square one at your institution. You can certainly talk to some of the folks I've identified. But this is just a really nice general resource, and you can see all the different things they provide for you here, everything from the initial plan to how you evaluate what you think you did. If you get nothing else from this session, please take this website, givingdayplaybook.org. Terrific resource. Tip number 9 is this. Don't make an annual giving calendar and segment it for donors and non-donors. Instead, make a donor calendar and a non-donor calendar and see where they intersect. This is a direct evolution of what was a very process-driven annual giving calendar into much more message-driven and segmentation-driven decision-making. So I think a couple of factors there. One, the point that was made about stewardship being much more expected than it used to be, and the fact that you really almost need a column in your annual giving calendar for stewardship of existing donors, and the differences in messaging that I think once somebody's made a gift to your institution and has made that statement, I think it becomes imperative for the institution to demonstrate that we know that you know that we know that you know that you gave before, and just to acknowledge the fact that we value this ongoing relationship, I think is very different from a lot of the messages we can experiment with from a non-donor point of view. So, even though I think we've come from a place where we sort of crafted one letter and segmented it for donors and non-donors, and, phone-a-thons were structured the same way, and now web-based strategies the same way, I think there's a much greater awareness of what was the giving vehicle that caused this gift to be made, and how do we respond in kind with that. I'm still amazed at people who will make an online gift to your organization, and the next appeal you'll send them is a paper letter or a phone call. And I think we just are slowly getting smarter in understanding who goes into what bucket. And so therefore, I think the thing that you used to lead with, which is the production structure, I think is being turned upside down. I think it's in our best interest to know who the donors are, know who the non-donors are, and think about what a year in the life of those respective audiences should look like. And there will still be places where the methods intersect, but not as much as the assumption, I think, used to be. Number 10 is that mobile friendly is now mobile first. And for the last couple of years, it's been considered best practice, I think, to have giving pages and appeals that don't look microscopic on a mobile device. And I think that evolution has taken another step, where I think for an entire generation and increasingly everybody, a mobile device is becoming the default first method that they're encountering whatever it is that you send them. So it's not just a luxury to be mobile-centric, it's increasingly the priority to be mobile-centric. Mobile-friendly is now mobile-first. I've seen some strategies that have made sense as to how that's evolved. Everything from this kind of a thing where you've got a big crowd of your constituents all together, and to do something like flashing an advert on the scoreboard, is not a bad thought about how to make something relevant and actionable to a mobile phone type of crowd. There's plenty of institutions that are encouraging cell phone contributions by just texting and then having the third-party MGive Foundation take out the gift from the phone bill. There's more angst about mobile giving in the States still these days than I think there is over in Europe. In the States, it can be tricky knowing who the donor is. There can be a cap on how much people can give. I didn't really want to convert the $100 donor into the $10 donor. The gift technically comes from the third party and not the individual. So there's still some clunky logs in the road, but places have been creative in how they work around those things. The text message itself is something that the cell phone company will share with you in the States. So that means you can invite somebody to provide their name and their graduation year, or provide a word that lets you know how they want to designate their gift. I've seen a lot of workarounds that places have used with degrees of success. Here's the type of mobile-friendly design that I think is becoming more and more essential. The reference to Duda Mobile there is for those of you from smaller shops who may not have a whole lot of tech savvy in designing mobile-friendly content. That doesn't mean that there aren't fairly inexpensive and painless solutions out there. This company is one. If you sign up for their basic service and provide the web pages that you want to be mobile-friendly, they will give you the links to converted forms of those pages. So I've even thought about using this with my own web page because I'm not a HTML guy, but I certainly want to be mobile first and not just mobile friendly. So resources like this are out there if you go look for them. Then there's other uses of the mobile phone that you just ought to have on your radar screen. One of them is this kind of screencasting is the new buzz phrase. And things like Georgetown University City Challenge that we talked about earlier, which featured a number of on-location alumni events in the big cities where Georgetown has alumni chapters. This became part of the evening's festivities to let the crowd in attendance see progress towards donations in support of the city challenge. And by inviting the audience to text their gift to a certain address, you could keep track with the thermometer there of how many gifts had actually come in during that event on that particular night. So the mobile giving thing, while maybe not an across-the-board solution for all audiences, in certain places and in certain situations, student giving programs, I've seen a lot of success with mobile giving text variations. And so think about the right moments where this becomes not a bad use of technology. And one more remark, that in the U.S. we've come to assume that text giving means utilizing this third-party MGive foundation, which then adds a gift to the cell phone bill. But anybody can text you a message that they want to make a gift to the regular giving program. And, that can be as simple as just providing the office or an office mobile phone that people can text a message to. Or there's some in-between service providers like this text-to-pledge vendor that will, structure a phone number so that you can invite your audiences to text a number, and then somebody in the office has to follow up and finish the payment on that pledge. Again, I prefer to have the gift in hand and have a completed transaction, but it is user-friendly to invite one of your constituents as they're sitting there thinking about the idea of making a gift, a quick and easy way to note that they want to be a contributor, and we can sort out the details at some other time. Number 11 is the idea that location-based fundraising has been liberated. And by that I mean it's been sort of clunky to be at different venues and at different places asking people for a gift. It's always sort of the dread of the alumni relations special event person that people are going to stop coming to events because they're all about giving. And, when we used to pass out pledge cards and things like that, it sort of interrupted the rhythm of the evening. I now see lots of opportunities to facilitate transactions quickly and easily. So whether it's the Square app or the sort of handheld devices where you can swipe a credit card. I know in the UK they bring that machine around to your table at a restaurant when it's time to pay. All of that technology is something to pay attention to because, speeding up the transaction, I think, has always been a goal in regular giving programs. Whether it was sending a return envelope for people writing a paper check or inviting a credit card gift over the phone, now to being able to swipe credit cards in very location-friendly kinds of ways. But where I think this opens up possibilities is those events, those on-campus things, those alumni chapter events, reunions, where people are feeling good things about us and are really sort of at their emotionally connected peak. To have the ability to facilitate a transaction right then and there, painlessly for the donor, is something that we haven't exactly been able to think about before. So you want to operationalize that as an idea. Here's one example for you. This is your blinky button strategy for regular giving. This is Purdue University's blinky button. The story that I have is from Northwestern, who's a big football competitor of Purdue. 2 years ago at Northwestern, for their big reunion for all alumni to come back and visit, they dressed a student from head to toe with blinky buttons just like this one, sent them into the reunion tent just holding a handheld credit card swiping machine and a smile on their face. And you can just imagine the people they bumped into with a beer in each hand. Not that beer's required, but it doesn't hurt. And a person saying, "How do I get one of those blinky buttons?" That's terrific. And the student annual giving specialist cheerfully replied, "I'll give you a blinky button with a $50 gift to the Northwestern Annual Fund." And Northwestern acquired hundreds of donors just by being in the right place at the right time, and at an event where people were just celebrating all things Northwestern and their connection to Northwestern. So think about that idea that, we used to be a little confined to appeals going out. And now I can snuggle up to when people are emotionally in the mood to think about making a gift. And now all of a sudden I've got the technology to complete transactions like that right at the moment when somebody is most inclined to say yes. There's your blinky button strategy for location-specific fundraising. Idea number 12 is something called Issue. If you're not familiar with Issue is a service provider that will take a paper document and convert it into an online digital document. Issue, here's their website here, and again, I'm not in cahoots with Issue or anybody else. The document they create allows people to turn pages. A lot of alumni magazines use Issue, and it's an idea that wouldn't have existed in a paper world. The idea of documents that somebody can peruse online, but aren't really worth the risk of the expense of printing it for a big mass quantity of people. By the way, Issue documents don't have to originate as paper documents. You can take any document that can be saved as a PDF, and Issue will convert it into their format, which becomes like sort of a magazine that you can flip through. Here's an example of that from the Culinary Institute of America. A couple years ago, they produced this holiday giving catalog. And as you flip through the pages of this, which is what they created with Issue, you can see different gift ideas to the Culinary Institute that all relate to cooking and being a chef. So there's the chef's uniform there for a gift of $275. There's a set of chef's knives. The complete set is $289. They even add some very development-friendly things like the gift of a current use expendable scholarship for $5,000. You flip through this and it's all very nice visual stuff about ways in which a gift of a certain amount can impact the Culinary Institute. The interesting thing about this is that the catalog doesn't exist in any paper format. It'd be too expensive to print, and you don't know exactly what audience it is that really this resonates for, as opposed to the broader alumni population at the CIA. So prohibitive from a paper printing point of view, but in a digital world, all of a sudden, not such a crazy idea. This has become so successful at CIA that it's become really one of their driving appeals for their annual giving program. This gets into the whole discussion about sort of allowing people to direct their gift in very precise ways. Interesting thing about the Culinary Institute is that they have a disclaimer in the back of their catalog that says, we can't tell you exactly which chef's knife set or which chef's apron is the one that you funded. We don't have the resources to track everybody's gift. What we're trying to do is give you a sense of what your gift of $250 can make possible. I love that idea. My opinion is in education, we get very anxious in trying to account where everybody's gift is going to go. I made that point in the stewardship conversation. Now all of a sudden in a web-based world, there are a lot of different layers of how you talk about uses of gifts. You can be very specific if you want and tell somebody this is your apron that you made possible. You can be very broad in inviting unrestricted gifts to your institution. And I think there's a lot of levels in between, including this one at the CIA, that they've used a digital document to talk about the kinds of things that can be done with gifts of different amounts. You can go that full step and do all that accounting if you want to, but I don't want to be critical of CIA for understanding how the web enables, talking in more descriptive ways about the kinds of uses of gifts without requiring that we all become accountants in tracking every gift that gets received. Not really easy to think about in a paper-driven world, but now with things like Issue, all of a sudden not such a crazy idea in the mix of appeals that we're sending out to folks. Number 13 is to remember that you had some of your audience at hello. And by that I mean we have a little bit of a tendency as we craft our appeals every year to go back to square one a little bit, even with people who've already made a gift. If people are hardcore non-donors, I think by definition we should float different ideas, different themes, different messages in front of them. But if somebody's made a gift, I sometimes think we overdo it in going all the way back to the beginning and explaining to them why they should consider being a supporter of our institution. Where this has showed up a lot in the last couple of years is in a type of direct mail piece. Some folks in the U.S. call this an Ugly Betty letter because it's not particularly long, it's not particularly warm, but it is meant to make a statement that we know you've supported us before. Maybe you don't need a whole complete soliloquy again this time, but we sure do value your support, and it's another annual giving year, so consider making a gift. You walk a little bit of a line with this. You don't want it to look like a bill or an invoice or anything sort of presumptive. But this also folds up in a way that tends to get it opened because people aren't sure what it is. And remember the point that for a segment of the existing donor population, they want to be annual giving donors. They want to be regular donors. They just need a reminder that it's time to make another gift. You can't take that relationship for granted, and I want to emphasize that. This mailing isn't a substitute for stewardship and giving people hugs. But I also think it's fair to say that sometimes we err too far on the other side of that conversation and craft these involved case for support messages with some people who really just needed to be reminded that we value their support and it's time to consider another gift. If you're trying to figure out what direct mail looks like in your program in 2015, my opinion is there's a place for this kind of an appeal to your existing donor audience just to remind them that you value their support. Number 14 in this seemingly unending list of trending tips is the idea of find who's raising their hand. And this has always been a good idea. I think it keeps advancing in part because we've gotten smarter as institutions at paying attention to who's being engaged in other ways. A lot of alumni relations activities were about just ensuring that there was a good crowd at an event, and there was sometimes not as good attention paid to specifically who came and remembering specifically who came. And now that social media has come along, there's a whole new realm of possibilities in terms of who links with us, who likes us on Facebook, who subscribes to emails, who opens emails, things like that. And so this is just a reminder to keep pushing that envelope and keep advancing that idea. I've started to see places get smarter at mining their own data in terms of what sorts of activities people were in when they were students. So here's a guy at this Methodist University who was the Student Government Association president, the first one, in fact, at Methodist. And they have figured out at Methodist that anybody who was that immersed in the student experience and was that connected with other classmates and just completely loved the Methodist University experience, socially and academically and otherwise, makes them a pretty good prospect to become a donor now that they're a graduate. So this is an appeal that went out to just the people who've served as the student government president over the years at Methodist University. Basically saying, we know that you know that we know that you know that we loved Methodist. We were jumping in with both feet into the whole experience, and now we're more likely than average to be a continuing lover of all things Methodist University. I mean, this is an appeal that resulted from this institution, learning through its own data that, gee, we seem to have an unusual amount of people who are donors who also were very involved in student activities such as this. So, it's not just today's data that can tell you who's raising their hand. It can even go back to the student experience and people like Julian Jessup here, class of 64, who were waving their arms at the time, showing you how much they were really bought in to the whole Methodist experience. It takes a little bit of digging sometimes to reconstruct this information. But once you have it, there's all sorts of interesting directions you can go with it. Join Julian with your gift as a former student president at Methodist University. Number 15, only commence crowdfunding with clarity. And this is not to rain on the parade of anybody that spoke at the conference about crowdfunding. I know there was even a pre-conference workshop that was well attended about what is crowdfunding and how do you do crowdfunding. There's some great providers out there with some great tools for how you custom build your own online crowdfunding site. There's certainly a lot of student organizations that would welcome project funding. There's a lot of faculty that would like research funding. And there's certainly a lot of other institutions getting into crowdfunding. So that's a tip of my hat to sort of the wave of crowdfunding buzz. And so this isn't meant to temper anybody's enthusiasm. But let me just say this. I think it's important to think through where a crowdfunding idea strategy fits in with your overall advancement program. Because there's a lot of questions that come on the table once you start thinking about offering, these sort of project-based funding ideas to your constituent audience. The University of Connecticut has what they call their Ignite program, and it's one of the smartest and well thought out ones I've seen in the States in terms of thinking comprehensively about all those development-related questions that ought to be answered. Including what's the criteria for projects that we should be celebrating at our own institution. Here's a part of what their application process looks like. This is for student groups that want funding from the Ignite program. And you can see that part of what the university is exploring is, what sort of connections does a student group have with alumni? What sort of web presence do they already have in their activities? If we picked you to be part of one of the Ignite projects, how are you going to help us out with your own promotion as a student group? Have you done any fundraising before, and what sort of successes have you had, and with what audiences? Rather than just sort of running out onto the campus and saying, who's got a project that we can put onto our crowdfunding site? I think it's real smart just to think about what's in it for the university or the institution if we decide to involve a particular project in the crowdfunding discussion. There's an additional element of responsibility for the student organizations that submit proposals. What's their role in stewardship going to be? What's their role in communicating the purpose of what they're trying to do with their project idea? What's their responsibility in promoting their cause to their own sort of social media connections? And what's the ongoing thank yous that they will commit to providing as part of the process as well. All of which is helpful, I think, in terms of understanding where we can go with crowdfunding that we haven't been able to go with our more traditional methods. So I'm really excited and interested and enthusiastic about crowdfunding as an idea. And there's some great web resources out there to help you. Again, we're not techies, so we'll take all the help we can get, right? But, don't forget to answer some of those important questions about what's the criteria for selecting projects, and whose responsibility is it after a gift is made from a stewardship point of view, and also what do these people get asked for as a next gift to the institution. You don't want a lot of people coming in the front door and walking out the back door. So think through all those things. Get some clarity before you jump into the crowdfunding. Number 16 is don't be relentlessly earnest. And let me explain what I mean by that. I sat with a college team in Melbourne this past year down in Australia, and we were talking about annual giving themes and the case for support. And at one point, the youngest person at the table, a guy who had just joined the staff, raised his hand, I think, and made the point that I sometimes worry that we're too relentlessly earnest. And I applauded that idea because I think that's an important statement to make. I think our default is to too often sound like we're competing with other charities, and we're trying to out-charity every other charity in talking about need and talking about how poor off our students are, and not that those aren't important phrases and important messages. But I do also think we ought to leave the door open or leave a space in the annual giving calendar that in a way that just engages people in a fun way, or it reminds them nostalgically about their time. It is almost sort of whimsical in the way that it connects with people. I don't think a lot of other charities have the ability to do that. I think in education we do. And so, where's that intersection of something that's kind of fun, something that has a good philanthropic purpose, and something that also reminds people about that emotional connection that they have with our institution? Here's a couple of examples of that. This guy, Chuck, who was at Cedarville University and retired just a couple years ago. He was the warden, if you will, in the dining hall. And one of his main jobs as the dining hall director was to make sure people weren't taking food out of the dining hall. You could eat whatever you wanted in the dining hall, well, you couldn't take it out of the dining hall. Apparently, you couldn't even take an apple out of the dining hall. So they decided to have some fun when Chuck retired a couple years ago and made an appeal all about that. The guy was the dining hall director for, I think, a couple of decades, I believe. So you had a whole generation of alumni that knew exactly who this guy was, and it made them smile when they designed an appeal around all around him. Part of the appeal was, 32 years the guy was the director. Part of the appeal was to make a gift and tell your favorite Chuck story, which isn't the most philanthropic message, but it's that emotional connection that reminds them that, there's a lot of good causes, but only one is my alma mater. And so, people responded to the idea of sharing their favorite Chuck moment as a bit of a testimonial at the time that they were making a gift. This thing I love, if you gave at least $100 in tribute to Chuck, they sent you a cafeteria tray autographed by Chuck. And they got, more than 100 people that took them up on that offer. It attracted a large number of broad-based donors, I think about 1,000 or so. This isn't to substitute for any of our need-based messages or time-specific kinds of messages. But in the regular giving calendar, I just think it's a good idea to make room for something that just is a little more fun, is a little less earnest, to use my Australian friend's word, and otherwise just invites people who almost give in spite of the fact that this isn't as earnest as other things you might send, but brings them back to when they were a student on your campus. That's a potential benefit you enjoy as an educational institution, and I sometimes think we don't hit the right notes with that often enough. So remember Chuck and the story of don't take apples from the dining hall. One more example of not being too relentlessly earnest is the good old Birding Big Day appeal from Earlham College in Indiana in the States. This has existed for quite a long time now. It originated as an idea. There were two faculty, I think they're ornithologists, who every spring would go out into the woods around the Earlham College campus and see how many species of returning bird they could identify back to the campus. And a whole annual giving appeal was based upon how many species of bird these two guys identified, and people pledged a certain amount of money based upon what that number was. You can see part of the appeal mailing every year was the entire list of how many species of birds got found by these two guys. So, this wouldn't show up on anybody's best practice appeal list. Certainly not earnest enough, right? But this was effective for this institution. It's the single biggest annual giving appeal element they conduct every year in terms of the money it raises. I think part of the reason why is the recipients of this mailing who went to Earlham say only Earlham would, where would something like this happen. So you've got just the right idea for bringing them back emotionally to the Earlham College campus every year, wherever in the world they might be. This started as an entirely paper-driven appeal. This has now become an entire worldwide web-based event, which includes a Google map so that alumni can post wherever they are in the world what species of bird they identify on this day in their own neck of the woods. So it's not only is it a nice emotional connection for people, it's made that transition from a paper-driven idea into more of an online social media idea. So again, just remember, don't be too earnest. And I'm all for need. I'm all for showing beneficiaries and all those things. But again, if you view the annual giving calendar as now being made up of a bunch of little messages and a bunch of little themes, I think there's a place in the calendar for people that just respond to a more whimsical kind of thing that reminds them emotionally of how connected they still are with your institution. Number 17, flat may not be the new up, up may be the new up. And again, this is maybe a United States-centric point, but it certainly has felt like fashion for the last couple of years, certainly since the big American financial meltdown back in 2007, 2008 or so. You'd go to a conference and you would almost see therapy going on between institutions that, we're not any worse off than anybody else. And in fact, flat is becoming the new up in annual giving. And the economy is turning around, and I think that's good from the standpoint over here. But I also sometimes worry that we've misdiagnosed the patient. Here's some American data. CAE is the Council for Aid to Education, and this is what the trajectory looks like for U.S. alumni giving over the last several years. And we've watched this line trend downward, and we come up with all sorts of reasons why this is, that the millennials don't like supporting institutions, that we just haven't emotionally connected with people like we used to with their parents and with their grandparents. A lot of reasons about why this supposedly can't be done anymore. And it's not the fault of the millennials or anybody else if we're not evolving our methods and our messages to resonate and be received, by that generation in the way that they're now living their lives. I point that out because this trend line actually doesn't come from CAE data, although that's what the CAE trend line looks like. This is actually a trend line that shows how many people are disconnecting their landline phones and how many people are now relying exclusively on their mobile phone. So if you're an American phone-a-thon that has raised a lot of money over the last 10 years by calling people's landline phone numbers, and now finds it hard to find somebody's mobile number or otherwise can't get somebody to pick up the phone, you've got a problem for yourself. And you dial and you dial and you dial. I see plenty of phone-a-thons in America that have become dial-a-thons because it's just too challenging to get somebody on the phone. So it's completely understandable to me that we would take a hit in our annual giving fundraising in the States just because the phone-a-thon, which was the centerpiece of so many college and university annual giving programs over the years, now all of a sudden has some real challenges that it didn't have to face before. The landlines are just one of them. The fact that people tend to not answer the phone when anybody calls it, when it's a number they don't recognize, is another. That used to be one of the things that you could assume in your phone-a-thon, that everybody was going to pick up the phone, and that's not the case anymore. So before I embrace fully the idea that flat is the new up, I just want to make the point that I think we have a responsibility as a profession and as regular giving programs, to make sure that our great messages, our great methods, our great constituents are all connecting with each other. And in fact, are we losing money that we used to raise just because our message isn't being heard, in some cases from, by people who've given before, but certainly with emerging younger generations who just communicate and exchange messages with each other differently from the way they did before. I accept that students are graduating with more debt and the economy hasn't helped at all. And those are all sort of winds that are blowing in our face. But I also think we have some responsibility to make sure that we're evolving in the same way that our audience is. So don't accept that flat is necessarily the new up. Tip number 18 is that it's still about the relationship, an idea that's an oldie but a goodie, and is ever more important today, as I think it becomes easier to saturate people with message after message after message and lead people to wonder if this is about a relationship or if this is about a transaction. So I am sympathetic to people who don't want social media to be all about solicitation, and I think the American experience there is that we wound up harming some long-term relationships because of our short-term priority for calling people as quickly as we can and as efficiently as we can, and I think really did a disservice with some of our graduates by rubbing them the wrong way and leading them to conclude this was only about fundraising. So a couple of timely examples that remind me of that these days, one of which is the whole stewardship discussion that we had earlier, that I don't think stewardship has ever been as important as it is now in annual giving, at least in terms of our ability to act upon stewardship with annual giving donors. And so remember all those suggestions that we gave. Here's some others to think about. This is an email that goes out from the University of Ottawa to people who were spoken to in the phone-a-thon and who said no, that they didn't want to make a gift. And this was previously not thought about much, that the concentration was on those people who did make a pledge and trying to fulfill those pledges as quickly as possible. There wasn't too much thought given to maintaining good relations with the people that took the time to pick up the phone but didn't want to make a gift. To go back to the frustrations we face with phone-a-thons, I think we're more at the mercy of the person being called now than we've ever been previously. And so, to keep that audience of people that will at least pick up the phone, to maximize that number, I think it's worth thinking about. What are we doing to demonstrate to people that we spoke with, even if they didn't make a gift, that we still value this relationship? And so here's one email that attempts to do that. What's that demonstration that you're not a number, you're not a transaction, we value our ongoing association with our graduates, is one example. And here's another one. I touched on this at the beginning when we were talking about time-specific messages. And one that's very personal and person-specific is this kind of an idea, this sort of happy birthday or happy anniversary of the date of your last gift. I have worked with a lot of vice presidents and presidents and board members who are just convinced that if we only solicited people for a gift at the same time they made their gift last year, they'd all automatically renew, which is a flawed theory in part because a lot of people give because it's when we got around to asking them for a gift, not because it's a time that they self-selected. But we'll leave that conversation for another day. The point here, I think, is still good and relevant and is a demonstration of a relationship. This is DePaul University in Chicago, where I live, and they sent this email reminder out to folks with a big smile on their face saying, happy anniversary of the date of your last gift, and we sure valued your support as a donor, and if you think that you didn't matter or that we weren't paying attention, we are, and we're grateful for you. And if you'd like, consider renewing your gift to the annual fund. In a paper printing world, this would be a more complicated headache to think about. But at DePaul, this is essentially an automatic mail merge kind of a process that doesn't require much staff time at all and generates several hundred renewal gifts for the university every year, without much cost to raise a dollar. And I think succeeds in part because people kind of smile and say, well, I didn't even know that they were paying attention, and I didn't know that a year had gone by since my last gift. So, just these kind of touches that remind people that it's not about the number of solicitations we send, but it's that we do value them as part of our community, and we do appreciate their ongoing statement of support through a regular gift. Here's another variation on that, by the way, from Sweetbriar College that's in Pennsylvania. Happy birthday of your last gift. A little more cute and warm and fuzzy, but I think the message is good behind it, that we really do value our supporters, each and every one. And if you thought you were just one of a bunch of people, we'd like you to know that we appreciate you in particular. Number 19, and maybe one of the most important ones in this list these days. Your institution isn't required to have an annual giving program. Make them need your annual giving program. I'm a little bit of an enabler in making presentations and speaking at case conferences and treating it almost as an assumed that you have a regular giving program. But you can't just assume that these days anymore. And in fact, I don't think any activity that we undertake in the advancement office is sacred if it can't be connected to what are the bigger development goals of the institution. Here's the list I've got of things that have become obsolete just in my lifetime. Encyclopedia Britannica there is a funny one that, it used to be a status symbol to have an Encyclopedia Britannica sitting in the living room of your house when I was a boy. And it was a real bad day for Encyclopedia Britannica when Google showed up and all of a sudden people didn't need a set of books that contained all the information your kid needed to know. Your kid could go online and find anything that was there online for the subject they were looking for more information about. So just a cautionary word that what are you doing to help your institution with what your regular giving program is setting out to accomplish? At some places, those are very participation-minded goals and metrics. At other places, those are very revenue-maximizing goals and metrics. And at other places, still, they're both of those sets of metrics. So I get that, but always remember to connect yourself to the broader institutional goal. Here's my short list of why I think annual giving remains so important, and I'm using annual and regular giving interchangeably. We certainly like unrestricted gift income, especially as donors remain loyal and remain reliable to our programs. I joke about Princeton and all the money they raise automatically every year because Princeton graduates have been programmed to support Princeton, but that's something to admire, the culture that has built up at places like Princeton. I think annual giving can help an institution get a read from all the people that like us, who's really willing to stand up and make a statement of that support, from all that affinity, who are the philanthropists that are out there and who wants to support us. I can do screenings, I can do ratings, I can do all kinds of scoring systems, but short of somebody making an outright gift to us and raising their hand, I think that's an extremely valuable flag for someone to raise and could lead to a much bigger giving relationship. But it starts still, more often than not, with that annual gift and the beginning of that giving habit. I think it's one measure of satisfaction, again, to go back to U.S. News and World Report, my friend Robert Morse, what he's trying to get a handle on is how satisfied your customers are. And I think a lot of your vice chancellors and your board members and your bosses value that metric for the same reason. We can certainly wind up chasing our tail at times when we're spending $10 to raise $1 from a brand new donor. in an effort to try and boost the participation rate. But there are still people out there who like that metric and like that validation of your mission. And so I think that's one way that the regular giving program can help support that goal. I can see how much people are interested in us, in the whole leadership giving strategy, the President's Circle, the Vice Chancellor's Council, all of those products, if you will, that start to identify, who might want to make a more significant gift in support of your institution. I think that's part of the annual giving program's work, is to see how much somebody cares about us. And rather than just making a token gift, how do we sort of nudge them with our strategies and our programs into making a little bit more of a statement with their gift? I can learn what people are interested in. What excites me about crowdfunding and the Culinary Institute's catalog of giving is that very idea, that I think part of what annual giving is trying to do is to get a read on what somebody's interested in, what floats their boat as a donor, and how do we use the regular giving program as a laboratory to uncover what somebody might be interested in. As I look at the crowdfunding technologies coming online, I think it only adds to our ability to learn more about folks and get more quickly to the things that they're really interested in. And it can be a primary doorway to major gifts. And I make fun of my major gift friends with their check ceremonies with the oversized checks, and they get an awful lot of attention, and justifiably so, for some of the transformational gifts that they receive. But I'm here to say, I think annual giving ought to help set that table any way that it can. And so I'm all for whatever kind of synergy that we can get. I think regular giving programs are the front door of philanthropy in a lot of cases for a lot of people. And so how do we motivate them to raise their hand the first time? How do we nurture those relationships? How do we make them feel appreciated? And how do we graduate them into more major gift conversations? And last but not least, whether or not people reply to your next annual giving or regular giving appeal, I still think that just beating the drum about the idea of giving is an important part of what we do. Michael Bloomberg, who is the mayor of New York and the head of the Bloomberg Company, and is now famous in American philanthropy. He's now committed more than $1 billion with a B to Johns Hopkins University, and that has immortalized him among philanthropists in the U.S. But his very first gift to Hopkins ever, the year after he graduated, was a $5 gift and the result of an annual giving appeal. So, maybe it was that early messaging that got him thinking about the idea of the statement he would want to make in future years to Johns Hopkins. And I think, again, we're planting a lot of seeds, and there's many green shoots that we're responsible for in regular giving. And so just to beat that drum with our messaging, I think is important. I'm not trying to overwhelm people with solicitations, but I do want them to understand the idea of giving back to an institution that hopefully had a good impact on them when they were here. Number 20, thank goodness, the last one on my list of trends is this important one. Be willing to try, and be willing to try, think outside the box. I know in the fundraising office, in regular giving, there's a steady progression of people that show up in your door with samples from other places or with ideas about how we could raise money. And it's a challenge just to get the time to put together a plan without people coming along and changing your plan as the year goes by. But it's also a very fluid time that we're in. And I think regular giving programs get rewarded for being nimble. And so if there was ever a time to have room in your thinking for trying things that we haven't done before but might work going forward, this would be the time to do that. Here's one quote to leave you with. This was in the New York Times, and a little bit of a trivia question here. Who said this? For the last decade and a half, we've been in sort of a free fall with everybody trying different things to see what works. I just thought this was a good idea that made sense. Let's give it a shot and see if it works. That sounds like something you could hear at a case conference these days, with regular giving fundraisers sort of having a pity party together about why flat is the new up, right? And why I'm doing bad, but I'm not any worse off than anybody else. The man who said this, of all people, was Weird Al Yankovic, who actually was on top of the record charts in the U.S. this past summer with his latest sort of parody of other songs, right? What he did, what his people did, was progressively release songs week by week, with a video and with a lot of social media driving it. And, you would hear one of his songs and get a kick out of it, so you'd pass it on to your friends. And all of that social media activity is what propelled his album up to the top of the record charts in the U.S. And so, if Weird Al Yankovic is willing to think outside the box, why shouldn't we? And he could sit there and say, well, nobody's making money off of records anymore these days, but he's willing to say, let's try some new stuff and see what works. And as odd as that sounds, that makes him not a bad role model for where I think we're coming from in regular giving fundraising. Remember what the web offers. One last point I wanted to make is this short list of things that I think we've been able to do since the internet has come along that you couldn't do in a paper-driven world, and where I think we're arriving in regular giving strategy at the moment is in combinations of these things. Real-time immediacy combined with peer networking, combined with transaction efficiency. I think that's driving a lot of the good ideas that you're seeing that are online these days. And so here's just a couple of examples off the top of my head. You take something like real-time immediacy and you combine it with strengthened peer networking, and I think that's why these day of giving appeals are working for us at the moment. You take things like the new canvas for the case for support and the ability to talk about a range of project ideas, along with the ability the internet offers to distribute that information. And I think that's why crowdfunding appeals are succeeding at the moment. And you take things like greater transaction efficiency and combine it with our ability to steward donors in an ongoing way. And I think that's why we've had such success at accumulating recurring, regular donors to our appeals. So, I think 2.0 of a lot of the latest ideas is going to be where those benefits intersect in the way that I've pointed out on these three examples. Okay, I've run out of breath. I've run out of time. If you've made it this long, thanks for sticking with it. One more Happy New Year wish and one more apology for not having been at the conference. If you've got your hands on the January issue of Case Currents, a couple of things to point out. There's an article from me in there talking about sometimes how we code people do not solicit for murky reasons and don't necessarily presume that they're dead to you. There's a great article in there from Adrian Salmon, one of the people who pinch hitted so nicely for me at the conference, and thanks, Adrian, talking about some of his direct mail package experiences at Leeds. Check that out. There's also a nice profile on Sue Cunningham, who's the new president of CASE, I'm proud to say, and is an old friend going back to my first days at the Case Spring Institute in Loughborough. Back 9 years ago. So congratulations to Sue, and check out that profile on her. One last page of propaganda. There's an email address if you have any questions or anything else I can provide on any of the samples that you saw in this session. There's the new Online Innovations book one more time, and keep an eye out for it. I'm proud of it, and get yourself in the next one, by the way. If there's anything you're doing that you're proud of, please let me know. There's my QR code if you want to see the Bob Burdenski Facebook page. And all those other articles are available on my website or also in the CASE archives. Thanks once more for listening in, and best wishes for fundraising success in this still new year of 2015. Bye!